Good evening, everyone.
Greetings, everyone.
First day of 2022 feels like just yesterday, yet it is about to end soon. Gradually, we are getting closer to the threshold we have been reading about in this book. Of course, this concept dazzles us when the book defines it as the happiness you pursued so far, that we will understand its true meaning only when we pass to the plan of love. Yet at the same time, we know this is the divine carrot before the humankind, so we can move towards the aim of completing this human stage, because the end of world cycle is getting nearer and nearer by each year passes. On the other hand, our situation, that is, the human situation, is not an easy state, after all those almost eternal stages of developing matter, and elevating it to a certain stage. Of course, humankind has become identified with it deeply, and inevitably, this identification turned into addiction and attachment. And now, it is time to end this deep attachment to matter, because it is also time to end this world cycle. Yes, in our previous videos, we had read and discussed the passages of this book about the upheaval of the last world cycle, when the lost continents Atlantis and Mu civilizations had submerged, and how the surviving humankind started the new generations of the new world cycle, which is our current cycle. Yes, last week, we read the passages on the detailed information how the magnetic field and the magnetic poles of our planet gets affected by the ever-increasing direct influences coming from the sojourner planet's magnetic field. This evening, we will continue to read the following passages. The direction of the former axis had diverted from its vertical position to the Earth's orbit at an angle of 23 degrees. Since the new tilt to be added to this axis due to the polar shift is 13 degrees, the obliquity degree which the new axis will gradually tilt and reach, as the final limit will be 23 degrees plus 13 degrees, equal to 36 degrees. Since the Earth's rotation around its own axis will always occur around its own axis, rotational directions of the Earth around its own axis will change as well according to this change tilting. Therefore, the polar points will occur according to the new rotational ways the Earth's magnetic fields will engage on because of the necessity of their disrupted equilibria, and the axis will emerge accordingly. These polar points, where the motions of the Earth are at zero as it rotates around on its own axis, will be the points which are antipodes of each other, that is, the points of two hemispheres which are diametrically opposite sides, and these are the points we indicated above. However, this situation belongs to the final stage, and will not occur at the first direct contact of the planet with the solar system. At the beginning, the north and south poles will start to shift very gradually toward these points. The initial influence of the planet which manifests in this way will begin vaguely 50 years later, and will continue very gradually between 50 and 100 years, and some slightly obvious climate changes will begin 50 years later. Nevertheless, this situation will still be not to a degree which preoccupies mankind.
Well, all of us know that one of the constant items in the global agenda is the climate change. In a multi-directional manner, researchers, academia, companies and governments try to offer and implement solutions in order to make things sustainable, recycled for avoiding the possibly devastating effects of the climate change. Who knows, maybe some experts in geography and climate change read this book, and when they discover that the technical information given in this book about the shifting of the magnetic poles already happened, this may lead to headlines or breaking news, like the book presages the pole shift tells what will happen to our world. And this may strike the attention of people all over the world. And in this passage we read about how the gradual changes will culminate at a final state. And yes, our planet has gone through such pole shifts many times, that is, the knowledge of these previous closing of world cycles is conveyed to the humankind of the following cycles as symbols like the deluge, the judgment day, the ending of world eras, etc. I mean, this world school graduated many beings at many closings of the world cycles. As the new graduates pass to the higher realms for their further development, our planet has gone through initial renovations and regenerations in order to prepare the new surface arrangement for the newcomers. And as we read about these detailed technical explanations, we are once again reminded that how everything is planned by the cadres of the beings in duty and kept in an equilibrium.
Yes, at this point, we must remember that this knowledge given in the spiritual communiqués that were received between 1958 and 1959. And when this book was disclosed in 2013, people were calculating all the time to understand if they would begin to count the years from the year of disclosure, or from the year it was compiled. There were many different calculations flying in the air. Actually, be it 50 or 150, the knowledge about the closing of the world cycle does not differ much. Also, as you said, it had happened many times when considering the age of our planet. Still, let's say that, since the compilation of this book, 50 years period was already completed in 2010s. So, now we are in the second 50 to 100 years period. And we see that the portents are becoming increasingly visible, detectable. For example, melting of the ice caps increased in the last 10 years because the global average temperature. Yet, the human psyche works so interestingly, sometimes people look like they don't take any of this into consideration. They don't care at all. But on the other hand, people demand for solutions and precautions to turn things back to normal. Of course, we should not think that the real situation is not only what we hear and watch on the TV news or social media, because behind the scenes, many researchers and scientists are working hard to invent various technologies and solutions that may never heard of so far. It may be because that they warn the general population about the incoming doom within the next 20 to 30 years. Somehow, we cannot learn about those research and researchers in the mainstream media. Yes, let's continue, but please notice that I will read a few passages back to back because they are interconnected. Changes at the equilibrium states which follow the initial disruption of the Earth's equilibrium by the initial influence of the planet will continue on until the moment the complete equilibrium is established through the successive value differentiations, which will go on between the motions of world parts. And this will occur as such: after the initial equilibrium disruption, former poles will get warmer. Consequently, the ice at the former North Pole which exists on the seas, and the ice at the former South Pole which sits on the land, will thaw as well because of the warming of those places. With the melting of the ice at the North Pole, the volume of the seas at this region will decrease, and with the melting of the ice at the South Pole over the lands, immense water masses will pour into the seas, and contrarily, the volume of the waters in the South Sea will increase. Consequently, as a result of the imbalance in the seas around the two poles, a great water current will start from south to north, and this situation will begin to impose new influences over the Earth's magnetic field, but stronger than the influence of the incoming planet, does and will cause the Earth's magnetic equilibrium lines to change more and more, and these will lead to other motions, and thence, the poles will then begin to converge on the points we indicated above, no longer by an external influence, but by the influences resulting from the equilibrium changes, which will occur through the successive value differentiation mechanism of the Earth, in the wake of this influence. Therefore, the first influence which causes the poles to shift upon the sphere will come from the sojourner planet, and then, the influence which will complete this deed will continue with the value differentiation mechanism of the motions of the Earth's own structure. Consequently, the equilibrium changes the Earth with its disrupted balance will go through until it reaches a state of complete equilibrium will increase, much more in the years following the 100th year, and ensure the swift convergence of the polar point to the places we delineated above. At the time the polar points get near to this final state, these changes will occur at the tropics. Well, the Tropic of Cancer will be 36 degrees latitude north of the new equator relative to the Earth's new axis against the Sun, and likewise, the Tropic of Capricorn will be 36 degrees latitude south of the equator. From the 100th year on, climates will gradually get near to the states expressed by these final degrees of temperature. When the final state is reached, the equilibrium of the Earth will be abruptly disturbed, and as we said, the world will be upside down within a short time with a semicircle turn. That is, the North Pole will replace the South Pole, and the South Pole will replace the North Pole. However, as we have previously said, we again state that these changes will occur not in the form of an impact to the sphere and its becoming topsy-turvy, but in the form of the pole shift. Yes. Let's pause here to discuss for a while.
As we read here, a chain of events starts following the effect of the initial influence of the sojourner planet's magnetic field over the initial disruption of the Earth's equilibrium. As though all those events are already stacked back to back, and as soon as this initial disruption happens, the rest follows each other like domino tiles pushing the next one. Even this is an indicator of how delicately balanced the system of our planet is. And this chain of events culminates with the shifting of the magnetic poles. So, this is not like as our wildest imaginations. I mean, the planet will not turn upside down on itself. No, only the angles of the pole points will change, and this change will be sufficient for the necessary regeneration of the planet, or the closing of the world cycle. As though there is a cover on the globe, and that cover shifts 13 degrees more than its current tilt, just like in this image we shared last week.
So, the world will not be topsy-turvy then?
No, it will not.
At first, people misunderstood this. That is why the book explains this in many ways frequently. This is not a state of becoming upside down in the physical manner. This is a state of magnetic shifting of the pole points because of the additional 13 degrees tilt to its current axial tilt.
Yes, in the previous passages we read in the previous week, information was given about the new geographical locations of the poles and the new degree of the axial tilt. Of course, with this change, tropics and equator lines will be changed as well. These are important data for the researchers and scientists that can compare these with the scientific measurements and findings. As you mentioned, the first and indirect effect of the sojourner planet's magnetic field already happened 50 years ago, and now we are in the second 50 years period. And still, the portents and signs of the coming natural changes will not preoccupy the minds of people in general. Perhaps it is because of our main problem. We cannot connect causes and effects of the life events, be it inner or outer. Yes, I suggest to our dear friends that you can mention this book to people around you with different educational backgrounds, because this book addresses a spectrum of comprehensions and realities. Among us there are medical doctors, microbiologists, chemists, biologists, geographical engineers, electrical engineers, as well as philosophers, dream researchers, regression therapists. This makes me think about the technical cadres and the subtler levels of existence this book mentions. Because even the most technical-looking profession is still related with the development of matter, and we know that development of matter and development of being advance in tandem. Be it a microbiologist that studies living organism under a microscope, or a theoretical physicist studying subatomic particles in the Hadron Collider, or an astronomer observing the patterns of the celestial objects, the professions we are engaged with today may be giving us some messages about the cadres of duty our beings will be assuming duties within.
Last week, we had talked about the purpose of the plan of duty regarding the sojourner planet and Earth, and it is threefold. First, when the sojourner planet is deorbited, of course, its equilibrium gets disturbed, and this leads to many quakes and convulsions on and in this planet. So, life forms the beings built there experience harsh events. Second one is the disruptions on the magnetic fields of the other spheres this deorbited planet travels in space. So, those spheres, and again, life forms on and in those spheres experience the results of those collisions of magnetic fields, and also, the magnetic field collisions bring out further chain of disruptions in the larger and further magnetic field synthesis of the systems those spheres belong to. And finally, when those chain reaction of magnetic field disruptions reach to our solar system, at first our planet gets affected indirectly, mostly by the disruptions of our sun's magnetic field, and later, directly, as it has already begun to be detected and felt as the increase in the anomalies in the global weather patterns, global temperatures, global fault line activity, etc. And as we experience the harsh and troubling results of such anomalies, and hear about the warnings of the researchers and scientists saying that worse is to come, we start to listen to them with more attention, so eventually, maybe more and more human beings will start to be concerned. Yet, you can ask, is it necessary? Because, with all those explanations and graphs and lists and findings, pro and con arguments, all we want to do is to convince our minds why this or that happens, which solutions scientists or government offer, how, why, when, and upon finding some explanations and justifications, our minds become pacified. However, we have already been getting distress signals from our inner world, even before climate change become an everyday subject. Our dreams, our intuitions, our compelling urges to search for answers to our greater questions, inspirations that may offer solutions to communal problems. I mean, as individuals, how we can swing to extreme ends within, like acting selfishly one minute and trying to live consciously in the next minute. We see the appearances of these two extreme ends of the pendulum in the humankind's actions and choices all over the world. As we read in this book, depending on our level of sincerity and depth and width of our wishing for good, the vibrations of our prayers act like a beacon for receiving sublimating influences, or reaching to the high levels. And a prayer circle I was invited last week reminded me those passages about praying we previously read in the Divine Order and the Universe. This circle meets online for 1 hour each month, and there is one citizen from almost each country, a truly international group, and they pray for the peace within and peace without. Our elders and the plans they received knowledge from taught us that smaller circle is bigger than the larger circle. This prayer circle's effort made me think each of them as a light. They strengthen their light during their meeting each month and then carry it to their communities in their countries. This is another small-scale example of the immense and instantaneous communication network working all the time in our universe. In that sense, I appreciate every effort of human beings in order to become conscious, aware, comprehending, to turn our heads towards to lights, be it small or big, it does not matter, to rise above the ever-repeating cycles of daily life, to take a step out of the automatic and habitual ways of living, make ourselves exposed to the light. Because, as the recent neurological findings show us, more we are exposed to something, more that thing becomes normal to us. Because of this, just solving Sudoku puzzles to fight against Alzheimer's is not sufficient. Our brains need new information, new impressions that are outside of the box of habits, so we need to get out of our existing belief and thought patterns. That's why, introducing more methods of active imagination or visualization techniques into our daily life is important. Yes, in those passages we read about the cataclysmic events that our world and all living beings on and in our planet will experience. Yet, what will we be doing until that moment comes? Especially us, the ones that heard, learnt and studied this knowledge, what we will be doing. You previously mentioned that our current interests, professions, etc., might be preparing our essence beings to the duties they will assume in the further stages of our spiritual development. Look at us, we are here, sharing this knowledge and trying to make it more and more understandable, not only for our dear friends but also for ourselves, because we feel a conscientious drive, motivating us to study and share together.
I'd like to add something. Whenever we mention the sublimating value of choosing and acting from the intuition of duty side of our duality unit, or in other words, living conscientiously, or whenever you ask what we will be doing until the closing of this world cycle, I see comments from our dear friends that I can summarize as, I don't do any harm, I don't do harmful things. Of course, this is a commendable attitude. However, we had read in one of the earlier spiritual communiqués that, woe to your day that's spent without doing any good. I'd like to underline the difference between these two attitudes. Harmlessness is good yet inactive. But doing good, helping others, doing some service for the betterment of human condition is better and active. And when we begin to feel some uneasiness about this inactive approach, then this means that we begin to intuit the sense of duty. Also, about your question on what will we be doing until the closing of this world's cycle, well, with the signs coming from our inner world, intuitions emerged due to the influences. Coming from essence knowledge, we can utilize this plasticity of our brain structure to ask questions about what we really need to do, individually and communally, and wait for the answers bloom within us. Such questions also act like an airport beacon, a kind of invitation for the higher and sublimating influences into our comprehension. As we read in this book, as the quality of our questions gets finer, the answers we can intuit and find will be coming from higher levels. After all, the knowledge in the divine order and the universe are the result of the questions asked by Mr. Ruhselman during the earlier spiritual communiqués he conducted with various mediums. He asked, and eventually the answer came. In that sense, if we want to gain more and more insights beyond the knowledge already given, then even though we don't have a clear understanding of the topics or concepts preoccupying our minds, we need to keep on asking such questions will keep our brains active. So, yes, is there a question in our mind? What is the concepts or events that my brain tries to comprehend, tries to discover the causality between among them? Or, just to break the habitual ways of our thinking, we can use Nietzsche's question to self. What would I be thinking if I was not thinking this?
Your words reminded me our dear master Mr. Eric Dull's advice to us. He was saying that there must be at least 3 questions a person cannot answer, and keeps on looking for answers to. And, let's say you found some answers. Do you change your questions, or simply remain mentally satisfied? Such self-inquiry is important, because after reading the mechanism of mediumship in this book, we understand that due to our constant influence exchange with our essence beings, we are indeed the mediums of our own. At this point of our development, we reached a state of ability of receiving intuitions and inspirations directly from our own essence being, from the group, level or organization with duty pertaining to our spiritual development. In that sense, when we ask a question, the answer comes from many directions, and in many ways, with events, with dreams, with gut feelings, with intuitions, with visions, even with the bits of other people's conversations. As we read in this book about the being and its comprehension, wherever comprehension is posited, it is there. And because our essence being is directed its perceptual projection to the hydrogen cosmos matter, the comprehension is here, and we try to widen its scope within the matter universe. Right now, the spotlight of my essence being on top of my physical body, and what will it take from the experiences of Tülin, not what Tülin ate or drank, but deep impressions that accumulated in Tülin's unconscious, which then to be filtered and processed by my essence being after the death of Tülin, of this physical body. Therefore, we need to feed our organism with such deep impressions, and it entails inner work, meditative work such as imagination, ritual worship, visualization, meditation, praying, yoga, mindfulness. Whatever suits you best. Some of us can do concentration work even they are standing on a crowded bus, commuting between home and workplace. So it is also possible to open space-time for such work even in our hectic daily life.
I find myself walking around the house when I am in deep thought.
And I find myself discovering similarities between the mundane work I am busy with, let's say cooking, baking, and with the divine systems mechanism. For example, a few days ago I was busy with making a dough for a gluten-free bread out of red lentils, and as I was adding the ingredients I started to think, humankind is making a bread of comprehension. If I may use a religious reference, a daily bread of comprehension, and in order to make it more encompassing and binding we need to add a ferment, which this book defines the comprehension is the ferment of the being, and also some other ingredients to make the bread impressionable. So we add, let's say, spices. And these can be the variety of the experiences, variety of our choices and actions that we make from either component of our duality unit. Let's say, I want my bread to be super healthy, and I add black pepper and curcumin, because when together, these spices are 20 times more beneficial for my immune system. But if I neglect the balance, if I add black pepper more than necessary, then the resultant bread becomes hard to eat and digest. So, I have to find a balance in each thing I do in life. A balance that is unique to me. Each of us are unique beings in this sense because there are no other beings in this system that lived the same 500 to 700 lifetimes, and that gained the same deep impressions. Just like the uniqueness of our fingerprints, the existential prints we leave as we traverse the hydrogen cosmos are unique to each of us. Of course, as human beings living multiple lifetimes in physical bodies, we assume multiple roles, experience character types, etc., and these are very similar to each other. Carl Jung named these universal dynamics as archetypes. It is like, each of us test and try a model in different time to gain impressions from each model, but each being gains different impressions, even though the model is the same. For example, recently, you experience the father archetype and I experience aunt archetype. Both of us are observing the growing up of children, yet we gain completely different impressions from these observations and experiences. Therefore, we need to appreciate this uniqueness of our existence and give the impressions their due. Let's continue reading. When the world is turned upside down by making a semicircle turn through the mechanism explained above, it is natural that the new axis of the Earth will take on a new direction according to the rotational state which will occur by the newly established equilibrium of the world. So, the events in the final stage of the world sinking which we have mentioned, that is, the moments of the world's submerging and Judgment Day, will correspond to the radical disruptions in the equilibrium during the Earth's becoming abruptly upside down, which starts suddenly after the poles reach the final points we indicated by first shifting gradually, which is completed within a few hours as the North Pole shifts to the south and replaces the South Pole, and on the other hand, the South Pole replaces the North Pole. However, the upheaval of the poles after this semicircle turn of the Earth will not put into effect a distinct change in the new world, even no change at all. For, after the poles are upside down, there will be no constituent belonging to the former geographical states, comparing the points where the new poles will be established with the former countries, and the geographical situation will be out of question. Therefore, the new world to be born, regardless of which degree its axial tilt will be, will have a North Pole and a South Pole, like today, and its poles belonging to the previous cycle will be of something of a past forgotten forever, together with all its geographical constitutions.
We read in this passage that with the completion of the magnetic shifts of the poles, within a few days, all those cataclysmic mega-events happen and the facade of the globe changes. In that sense, the specific information such as where the new pole points will be located, from which latitude the equator will be away, will concern the new humankind of the New World School. And, only after a few centuries later, when the next generations begin to find about as they become able to engage with natural sciences.
All right, let's continue reading. It should never be forgotten that the influences which put into effect all these events and consequences descend directly or indirectly to the magnetic field of the world from the sublime plan, which is engaged with providing the states the world needs, as we always repeat, in accordance with the original directives filtering from the unitary. Doses of these influences are sent with their exact values, neither a little more nor a little less, and so the original necessities are executed. Therefore, all these acts are not unplanned, but are put into effect within certain criteria and orientated to the purpose of application of an immense evolutionary plan. And all of these are devices which are full of wisdom and established within the immense harmony and order of universe on the evolutionary path. In this day of utter confusion, there is not a disaster as it is seen. Things that happen here will ensure, on the one hand, the transition of mankind to the realms they deserved, who successfully completed their evolutionary cycles in the world, and turned their backs on world matter which does not satisfy them anymore. And, on the other hand, they will fulfill the needs of unprepared mankind, who long for returning back to coarse matter, and could not shake themselves free of coarse matter, assuming that happiness would only be gained by becoming buried in that matter. The mechanism of destiny appreciates the degrees of merit, in accordance with mankind's efforts on the path of attaining the spaces they choose, want, and need by their freedom, which is taken as a basic in evolution, and they execute their necessities accordingly. Consequently, at the stage of the world's closing, everybody will find what he seeks, his needs will be responded to, he will reach his place at the merit steps of the evolutionary ladder, and by this, the ones who progress will progress, and those who regress will remain in their place. Therefore, in spite of their horrible and formidable appearances, these closing scenes of the world will be the greatest moment of liberation, the arising of the most joyful and happiest day, the breaking of the greatest Redeemer dawn which was expected for ages. Here we have shown that the world, by completing another developmental cycle since the closing of the MU cycle, is about to add another one to its openings and closings, which have been repeated hundreds of thousands of times. This situation, which has been determined for the world in the face of the sublime principles, will continue again and again, and consequently, each time the world will prepare the ground for mankind to become completely free of the world and leave in masses in order to pass to the higher realms which they need and have acquired the merit for, after completing their evolutionary preparations particular to the world, by utilizing all developmental possibilities of its one cycle.
Yes, we see that in the world, everything is cyclical. This world school educates its enrollers period by period, or cycle by cycle. This divine school of training, just like any school, it has a date of opening and a date of closing when the graduation day comes. Yes, we learnt that our current cycle has opened by the closing of the Mu civilization cycle, and just like the previous cycle did, when our cycle ends a new term, a new cycle will begin for the new humankind. Regardless of the curriculum of each cycle, the education given in this world school is for the spiritual development of the human beings. And, as we read in the divine order and the universe, necessity is the expression of situations that are stated and determined in the original principle, and due to developmental needs and evolutionary necessities, each student of the world school, that is, each human being, will be appreciated by the mechanism of destiny, in accordance by the choices, decisions, and actions they make, and by this fair and just comparison, as we read here. Ones who progress will progress, and those who regress will remain in their place. And this sentence is so beautiful. Mankind's efforts on the path of attaining the spaces they choose, want, and need by their freedom, which is taken as a basic in evolution. This is another good question to ask ourselves. What do I prefer right now by my freedom of choice? Or at the end of each day, what did I choose or prefer today with my freedom of choice? And about our wants and our needs, what do I expect from life? What do I want in this life? And what about my needs? What are my true needs? What I see as need is truly my need. Which of these are imposed on me? Which of these are oriented toward more immersion in matter? Which of these are oriented toward carrying myself one step further in the spiritual evolution? This passage, when we read its content as an invitation to self-inquiry, then, we can be more aware of the efforts we make on the path of attaining the spaces we choose, want, and need by our freedom. Tülin previously mentioned a prayer circle. People from all countries join each month and meditate on images for the well-being of the world. Again, we read in this book that the space kept live in the imagination is a true and genuine value. Therefore, more questions to ask ourselves. What is happening within our imagination when we are alone or thinking about someone, about world, etc.? What's going on in our mind? What's slow cooking on the back burner? Or, what do we watch on our mind TV? I talk about the ongoing state of passive watching whatever is happening in our mind. What are those images? What traits do we have invoking or inviting such images? As we invoke or invite these, they become the causality of ever-renewing images. They will invite more and more images in as a chain reaction. Therefore, as you nicely expressed, yes, this world cycle will end. Alright, then at which point you are in this process? What are you doing? What should you be doing? The importance of such questions, and of course, our sincere replies to such self-inquiry lies in that sentence from this passage I previously mentioned. Because each of us will encounter whatever is the merit of our choices, our needs and our actions we did and do by our freedom of choice. And the plan tells us, expecting superior results from the world matter, which become unable to offer possibilities for further leaps of the beings, would be like pressing oil out of marble. So, what do we expect from matter? What does this world promise you, and what do you do with these? Almost all ancient and religious teachings have been telling us, know yourself and train your sensual side. This means that loosening your bonds and ties to our worldly parts, and also making efforts all the time to widen our comprehension and conscience one step further. Again, this ending of this world cycle is inevitable. It is destined and determined. I mean, asking and thinking if this will happen or not is in vain.
Still, knowing this don't stop us from feeling scared about this ending, comment some of our dear friends. Another one says, even if we survive those disasters, the situation gets worse. Then we will be regressed to primitive humans, even turn into cannibals. Let me remind you, dear friends, that as the primitive humankind at the opening of current world cycle, almost all of us went through those stages of comprehension's development. Instincts. Then instincts turning into automatic states, and then semi-automatic states, then more or less comprehending states, and later semi-comprehending states. And at the closing of this current world cycle, each of us will encounter our true needs in accordance the merit we gained by choosing and acting throughout the human stage via freedom of choice. And when we read about surviving human beings' regression to primitive states, it means that they're forgetting whatever they know and learnt. And again, when compared the majority of humankind that gained the merit and prepared to grasp the possibility of completely releasing the matter that is not sufficient for the higher needs of the beings, surviving human beings will be small in numbers. And please know that the purpose of the plans with duty is to culling the whole humankind. They bring out all those processes as help with the purpose of waking up more and more human beings so they can pass to the plan of love, that semi-subtle realm. Yet, as we read in this passage, the needs of unprepared mankind who long for returning back to coarse matter and could not shake themselves free of coarse matter will also be met. So, this is not a punishment. Alright, this evening, our dear friends asked questions, and we replied them with more questions.
And finally, we completed reading the passages on the closing of this world cycle.
Yes, we hope to see you all next week, dear friends. Good evening.